I'm Clay Horton, and this is an oral history of Kirtland Community College. Today is the 16th of March, 2017. I'm with Jim Garlo. Jim was one of the early leaders at the college dealing with mathematics and technology. Jim, thanks so much for coming in and doing this.
You're welcome, Clay.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in education.
That's kind of a hard one. I took my time getting there, I guess. Right out of high school, I went on to college. I went to a school in New Ulm, Minnesota. It was called Dr. Martin Luther Teachers College. And I lasted about a year and a half there before I decided that was not what I wanted to do. And I came back home to Saginaw, and I worked, got a job, and got married to my wife, Carol Marie Reichley. And we both worked together, apart, but for the paycheck. And about the first year, her paycheck was much larger than mine, and I realized that we wanted to have a family, and that I needed to do something else. So I started taking part-time classes at Delta. I think wasn't a community college. I think it was just Delta Junior College at that time. And I took some accounting classes. I took some basic English classes for one semester or 2 semesters, I think. I was working at Heaven Rich's Clothing Store, which is a family-owned store which was a family-owned store in Saginaw. And I asked my employer, Mr. Heavenrich, if he wouldn't help me finance my night classes I was taking at Delta. And he said, in fact, I didn't ask him. I asked him for a raise. And he said no, he wouldn't give me a raise, but he would be glad to pay for my tuition if I would show him my grade slip at the end of each semester. And I tried to explain to him that I agreed with that. I went along with it, but I told him I didn't want to be tied down to his store or his job if and when I did graduate from school. And he did say that that was fair. So I did that for 2 semesters, and he paid my bills, and I then decided to go back to school full-time. And so I lived in Saginaw. I commuted to Mount Pleasant Central University. Central
Michigan University.
Yeah, Central Michigan University. It's been a long time. Completed my degree in, I believe it was about a year and a half. And then I decided to go on and stay on for 1 semester and started working on a master's. And my undergraduate work was in a master's, undergraduate major was mathematics, a minor in accounting. And I decided I would like to get a minor, a degree, further degree in mathematics. So I got 1 semester in, and then at that point we moved to Oscoda to find work, because I did have my teacher's certificate. So I found a job in Oscoda, and Carol, who was a medical technician, the same day found a job in East Tawas at their hospital. So that's how we started out. And I did take night classes, and I took evening classes, and weekend classes for a year, and completed my master's degree. And at that point, Kirtland was circulating. It was a pamphlet. Kirtland was just opening. This was I think it was in 67, it was 67. And I found the pamphlet on the table in our teacher's lounge at school, and I called them, asked them if they were still looking for instructors, and they told me that they hadn't even gotten to that point yet, but they were making a list of interested people, and they would contact me later. And sure enough, they did. And I came over I was living in East Tawas, to Roscommon to interview for the position, And at that time, we did not have any buildings out here. The Student Center was the first building built, and it wasn't built yet. There was a building strike that summer of '68, and the college was also building some houses for faculty and administration. I believe they were putting up 12 houses for the administrators, and the other 10 for instructors. And they weren't finished either because of the same building strike. So all the people at that point, we were all new. All 10 instructors and 4 administrators were from different parts of the state and country. And we all came in, well, with various times, but we were looking for housing. And at that point, there was no housing in the city of Roscommon or anywhere. The best you could do would be a cabin someplace. And so we were kind of looking around. Carol and I ended up renting a cabin on St. Helen Lake. And we came in August. School started in October. And so we didn't move into our house until sometime in November, late November, early December, before the houses were livable. They were livable, but they weren't completed. Like we helped paint the inside of the house. We did put some plaster up. We helped out with moldings, just the finish work. But anyway, it was a place to stay.
This is the housing on College Drive.
This is the housing on College Drive. And not a funny thing, but something that happened. The house we stayed in was the second house on the left-hand side of the road as you turn in from F97. And the houses were not completed. All the houses, they all had garages. But it stored, they weren't usable because they were storing building materials in the garages. One garage would have some furnaces, some garages would have this or that, and our garage just happened to have shutters. And there weren't enough, I counted them, there weren't enough for 14 houses. It turned out after a while I found out that they were only for the administrators' houses, and there was just enough for 4.
As I recall, the administrators' houses were somewhat larger than the other houses.
That's correct, quite a bit. The administrators had a fireplace and maybe another bedroom, but they were nice homes. They were fine. Yeah. Well, anyway, I found. I didn't know what those, who gets the shutters, but I know that I thought that since we're in my garage, I did take 2 or more out, and I painted them. I think I painted them red, and I put them up. And I drive by that. I haven't been by that house recently, but it's still up. It's one that hasn't been torn down or moved, and it still is the only house on that drive that has red shutters. So anyway, I don't know why I did that, but that's why I even talked about that. But that's the house on that drive. What's next, Clay?
What was it like the first year when you met students and met the faculty and the administrators and Dr. Van Buskirk and all of that? Yeah. Well, our first year, we were there in August to start school, but we didn't start till October, so we had some time on our hands. I did a lot of fishing. I was on the lake, but other than that, we had to, when we started teaching, we had to develop all the coursework, the whole curriculum. There was no what word do I need, Clay? No. There's no pattern.
No, I know.
There's nothing to follow. Yeah. It's all brand new.
So that's one thing that kept us busy for the first couple of months. ordering textbooks, writing not really lesson plans but outlines, setting up the total curriculum. And we all had that job because there was only there was one person hired in each of the major areas. Mr. Moses and I both taught in math, but there was an academic, I shouldn't say academic math, but it's what I'm going to call it. It was the transfer type math, and then the tech math that was kind of in-house math that was used by most of the students in our technical programs, and we had many of our students were in the technical programs. Anyway, my first meeting with anyone, from my interview, I came to Roscommon, and there was no building here out at the campus, but in town they rented the upstairs of a building that was one time used for the bank in Roscommon. And there was up the stairway, there was administrative offices and a few little rooms that the faculty and other people could use. But that's where I first met Dr. Bartho. He was the academic dean at that point. And that's where I had my interview, and he recommended me to the board for the position. And that's how I got there. And everybody will have a story of their own on that. It was kind of surprising not to have a building to look at or to work in, teach in. I think our first semester, and I told you it started in October. The first semester, I think, we had about 103 or 4, something like that, students the first semester. And what we did, what the administration did is, since we had no building, they bought, I think it was 4 or 5 portable units. One of them was made into a unit for faculty offices. Other was administration, and I think, well, maybe there's more than 4, but there was one of them was a cafeteria for the students and faculty and staff, and I think 2 were set up for classrooms.
Most of these portables were on the south side of the campus, adjacent to the F-97 access.
And I don't, is the bird feeder still standing?
The bird feeder, and in fact all those buildings were taken down,
Okay.
and they had kept a couple of them almost to about the year 2000. But
For
by
storage
the time they
and
did
stuff.
their year 2000 expansion, they cleared out
Okay,
all of those, and unless you look hard, you can't really tell they were there.
okay. Yep. The it's the same thing, the faculty housing, that is, a lot of those buildings have been removed.
Some of them have been removed.
Yeah,
Some of
and
them are still there.
There's, and some you wouldn't recognize, haven't they redone a few? Like the nursing, isn't there a nursing walk-in clinic type thing over there? Is that moved too now?
One of the sites was developed into a nurse-managed clinic in the 1990s, but that proved to be economically unfeasible. So
Okay.
they abandoned it, and so we use it for different functions now. I think it's used primarily for storage, but it's next to the location of the well that they put in to service the campus.
Okay, all
So
right.
the nurse-managed clinic is in the neighborhood of the College Drive housing.
Yeah,
It looks distinct architecturally from it, but a lot of those houses are still there.
okay. What other uses? One was child care for a while. Or that's the
had-
one I lived in, was a child care for quite a while.
Yeah, there was a child care center active on the Roscommon campus for a number of years. That was discontinued in 2015, 2016, that
Okay.
era.
Oh,
And they found that because the student population had changed somewhat, that there wasn't as much need for it. And that brings me to my next question. What were the students like when you first started out? What were the first 103 like compared to what you might have seen when you were at Central Michigan?
well, there were quite a few vets coming home from the service. And I'd say we had a large number of vets.
These were Vietnam.
Yes, they were. In fact, at least one of our instructors, Paul Durbin, taught taught secretarial science, but he did not. That program wasn't started for a couple of years. So he was not one of the original, but he was a Vietnam vet that actually had his degree and came in.
One of our automotive instructors, Bob Shingledecker, also had a Vietnam era experience.
Okay, I had Bob. Being that small, we had them all in class. I had Bob in a business math class. Bob Shingledecker was our automotive, turned out to be the head of the automotive program. And I had your dad in class.
John Horton.
John Horton, in a math class. We had, since we only had that number of students, we had a lot of small classes, and maybe we had a couple extra, more different classes, because I know we ran night classes, day classes, and between Maurice and myself, we covered all the math. And you might only have one or two kids in the class, but it all worked out. It was a fun time. We were all new and young and full of energy. And
that still happens around here every once in a while. Where you get a section of calculus that gets pretty small, but
yeah, well, that was quite regular, the calculus class. But we had an adult. I don't know why I couldn't say, maybe 50-50. We had adults and those first just out of college students. We had a big range. I had a lot of students that were older than I was. At that point, they might even been twice my age.
So did I when I started.
Yeah. So that I can remember during registration, we were registering in the student center, that big open part, which at that time it had a fireplace in the middle, sunk into the ground, and we would have registration all day long, and then every night, I don't know, 7 to 10 or something, but I can remember waiting looking out the window to see if we could see a car coming down the road, because you might only see 2 people in the evening that would come in, because I think we held registration like for a week at a time, and it just wasn't busy. So
it was a different era.
It was, yes.
A lot of people who came to Kirtland had experience in the military, had worked for a number of years, had children they were responsible for, had parents they were responsible for.
Correct.
It's only in more recent days that our average population went from being 29 years old to being about 20 or 22. And that's a big difference. It's a big change in how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
Who were some of the other people that you worked with at the beginning, and what were some of your thoughts on them?
Well, my boss was Dr. Bob Barthel. Try to say that.
We'll edit that out.
He was a good man. I enjoyed him. He was not real. He was not real happy to be up in the northern woods. He came from down in I think Indiana, and he never got over all the trees that we had here. And it was his statement.
It's hard to understand. I've driven through Indiana. There are lots of trees in Indiana. I don't know what happened.
But not as thick as we have them up here. And Bob would say, "You see one tree, you see them all," and it was. But anyway, he was a good man. A lot of good direction. Give you a job, and he'd point you at it, and he'd expect you would do it, and he would give us the freedom we needed, which was definitely different for me, because I came out of a high school situation, and they pretty much tell you exactly what you can do or should do, and we didn't have that. It was for us to develop the classes and to teach them the way we wanted to teach them, how we thought they should be taught. And we all learned together, the students and the faculty. It turned out we had a very happy with all the people we had working in the faculty staff. Um,
So there were about 10 instructors when you first came on. We know about Morris Moses. He came here from Asia and through England and was the first one hired. And he spent the first 5 or 6 months of his time here engineering the college, which I thought was interesting.
Developing some of the drawings and things, because he was he wasn't an architect. That was Dave Eggman, but we didn't have Dave. Art Carroll taught in that area. But anyway, but I know Maurice was involved in some of it. I think
He had a lot of
the
experience.
designation, designing the labs.
Yes,
in
he
the
designed the
physics
COS
labs.
labs, and he designed some other
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
and he taught drafting from time to time. I remember he would bring people into the student center, and they would measure the steps that went into the fireplace.
Okay.
And they had to make sure, because he knew what they were, they'd been done several times before, so the people who were doing it had to be very accurate, very careful. Who were some of the other people who were teaching at the beginning?
Well, the English instructor was Phil Long. He came from Pellston, Michigan. He was a high school teacher. He was kind of the oldest faculty member we had, and he might have been late 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And because the rest of us, most of us were in our 20s, mid-20s. And so we kind of looked up to him as a father image. And he would kind of, I think that maybe that first year or so, he had a lot to do with the direction of how the faculty went. I'm trying to think.
Who was doing chemistry and physics?
Mr. Moses taught physics.
Okay.
The chemistry, I'm just trying to think now, because there was a biology class. I don't know that chemistry is offered that first year,
Oh,
but it might have been. I know we had a person, Bill Swift, his name was, taught biology. He might have taught a course in chemistry too.
mm-hmm.
But it's pretty much as they'll develop a course semester by semester till they get their 2 courses in,
Sure.
and make adjustments as they go along. And over a period of a few years, you get a workable course outline set up. I'm not. Tom Dale would know that.
When did Tom Dale come on board?
When did he come on board? I
Yes.
can't tell you exactly. He was about, I say, 7 years later.
Oh, okay. So
He's been here a long time.
he certainly was.
Yes, and there was, well, just thinking how there was we had the art. We had an art instructor. His name was Dwayne Bastian, and I haven't heard anything about Dwayne recently. In fact, I don't know where he is now. There was a person in the retail business area. His name was J.P. Ryan, a funny man, different man. He went into administration in schools, and I think at one time, or at least maybe he still is if he's not retired, he was superintendent of some system downstate.
Mm-hmm.
Art Caherl, I mentioned his name in passing. He taught drafting, and he went on into education, in administration. Stan Evers taught electronics, and Stan also went into administration. Pete Chucci, he taught history.
He was from the Upper Peninsula.
He was from the UP. Yep. He was from either Houghton or Hancock, one or the other. He went to Sumi College, which is up there.
They call it Finlandia now,
Okay.
for folks who are interested. But it seems like we've always had a cohort of Upper Peninsula people working here, and they always tend to stick together. And they don't necessarily integrate with the rest of the group. And some of us might claim that might be for the better, but it's hard to say sometimes.
I'm trying to think. We had our library director, or head of the library, was Bill Studwell. and his wife, Ann Studwell, taught English, along with Phil Long, and maybe speech. I don't know where that came in, but it's in that area. I'm trying to think of other people now. Our first automotive instructor was Owen Ellison. He was then the owner of a gas station in Roscommon, and I'm trying to think what the name of that was. Doesn't matter. But can you imagine teaching automotive to a group of students that have no classroom, that have no car lift, that have no tools? But I remember when they finally did open the student center. I think they opened the student center the second semester of that first year. And you could drive up. It wasn't completely done, but you could get into the rooms, not through you could get it through the front door, but the instructors could get in. There's side doors. There was a side door to each one of the rooms. And there were about 4 rooms on each side of that building, or more. And I can remember seeing Owen bring his car and back it up into that door that would get him into his classroom. And he would open up his trunk, and he'd wave the students out. And the students, he had all his tools in his car. They pull them all up, take them inside, whatever gauges or whatever he was teaching. And the same thing after class, they'd all load them back up, and he'd take them home with them. That was a different situation, but it worked. Worked very well.
It's true the way that we teach math has evolved over time.
Mm-hmm.
And we went from the student math study group to perhaps more enlightened methods to the point now where a lot of our math instruction is actually done electronically. And most of the instructors are facilitating. They're not actually presenting things to the group.
Programmed learning. Yep.
And that's all well and good. We can talk about that. But you were one of the leaders in technology at Kirtland from the very beginning. Can you talk about what it was like with the early days of computers and some of the issues you might have run into?
Yes. Well, the early days, we didn't have them. In fact, when we first started, we didn't have the handheld calculator that they have today. We had the add and subtract machine, but we didn't have a logarithm. We didn't have exponents. We didn't have a whole lot of things.
This is 1968, 69.
That's right. And I remember a lot of the class, the math class, was just to teach the students how to use a logarithm table, how to use a slide rule, things like that. Because with the slide rule, you add lengths together to perform multiplication, and to perform division, you subtract them. The reason for that is you all know that logarithms are exponents, and if you have like bases and you multiply them together, all you have to do is add their exponents. And like x squared times x cubed is x to the 5th. You actually multiplied them together, but to get the answer you added. So that's how the logarithmic tables are set up. They took a ruler and they drew the scale out from 1 to 10, and then they had 2 of those, identical, but they put both of them side by side and you could slide them. So you could take one end of the ruler, put the one at the other, and add those 2 lengths together, and your answer would be the product and not the sum of the lengths. And in a similar way, they would take, to get to the division part, they would take the 1 to 10 ruler and divide it into, say, 3 parts. And as you worked with that one, you would actually come up division by 3. But anyway, let's get away from that. Let's talk about
It's true that you had to do a lot of things on paper at the beginning.
Yes.
Then we get about 10 years into it, and calculators have come out, but they don't have that much power. We go a few more years later, and you're using calculators that can send formula from one to the other, and you might load it on the first student's calculator, then they'll pass it back and forth amongst the classroom in order to get what they're working on. And then we kind of step away from using graphing calculators. We start using tablets and computers, and now they'll use something called a Chromebook, which is kind of a stripped-down computer, but it's nice because it fits into a teaching environment. There's not that much maintenance you have to do to it. What we wanted to talk about was when they first started using PETs. I think that's where Kirtland got into the computer business. What was it like?
It was different. We I think it was 1975 that I took a sabbatical leave and went to the University of New Mexico, Albuquerque. And there's nothing special about that school, but that's where we went. And I took some computer courses. I took a basic course. I took a Fortran course. I took statistics. But I took 5 classes. And of the 5, the one I liked the most was this basic class. At that point, PET computers came out, and so did, I think, Apple. I'm not sure that Apple was one of the first ones, but it was the first computer that you could actually type instructions to the computer and execute them on the spot. The reason that was so important is that before that, the computers were programmed with cards, and for each line of code, which was simply a command that you're asking the computer to do, you would make out a program. You'd write each sentence 1, 2, 3 down the list, and every sentence you had to put on you would take and punch a card. It would punch holes out in that card that would represent the sentence that you wrote, the command. And then you'd take these stack of cards, and you had them numbered, and you would line them up one by one, and then you would feed them into a machine called a compiler. And all the compiler did was take those machine language commands and turn it into a machine language code that you no longer could read, but the machine couldn't read what they started with. So actually, the compiler just changed your commands into a language you could understand, which was called machine language. And it would spit back at you another set of cards, its version of what you said. And then you would walk over to the computer itself and feed in that deck of cards you have, and it would then go through and complete all the commands. And if you had something that was supposed to be printed out, it would do that for you. But many of the times when it got to that point, if there was a mistake made in any one of those cards, the computer would tell you that you had a mistake in this card, go back and correct it. So that would mean you get your cards back, and you have to start step 1 and retype all those cards and then send them back in. What made it extremely hard is that we had no computer to do this. But we did find a card punch, a key punch, that we found the cards we could use, so we could punch our cards. But to get a computer, I went down to Delta College, and I talked to the people in their computer science area and asked them if we would send them our cards in the mail, if they wouldn't compile them for us, and then if there were no mistakes, run them through and send us back the printout. And that worked pretty well, but the big hold-up on that was that if you send them your cards and you have a mistake, the computer just comes back and tells you have an error, and it points out where it's at. But you get the cards back. So what Delta had to do is they had to send those cards back to us, and that student had to make his corrections, correct them, send them back again. Mm-hmm. And so you can miss it 3-4 times in a row, because it wouldn't pick out all the mistakes in the program. It picked out, stop at the one it didn't like. And so if there was other ones following, it didn't check that far. I offered a programming course where we just studied how to instruct the computer to do various things mathematically. And I had about, I think there was 5 to 7 programs that we'd run in a series of the class. And the first week, I'd probably cover one of these every week, and the students would work on them, send their cards in, and by the next week, the second program was discussed and assigned. And so we have a student would be working at, could be 7 different programs at once, where he's still working on program 1, making a correction, and down the line. So it turned out that I only really had to really instruct about the first 7 weeks. And the next 7 weeks or 8 weeks, we would just be working together on correcting the programs. So that is why this PET computer that came out was so nice, in that you could sit down, instead of using a key punch to punch these cards, you could type this right on the screen, and you just push enter, and you put your next line in. You can go through and put all your lines in, and when you got them there, you didn't have cards, you just push run, and it would try to execute your code. And if it had a mistake, it would stop you there and say, you've got an error here, correct it. And it would go right down the line and correct your errors for you first. It wouldn't correct them for you, but it would point them out they're wrong. And then, after we had them corrected, then when you ran it, it was done. We had our output, we had our printout, we were done.
I remember part of what happened with the pets is that if you left the power supply plugged in overnight or over the weekend, you could come back on Monday and you'd have to get a new power supply. It would melt itself.
We had a lot of problem, well, just because it was something new. Mm-hmm. When I bought, as I said, I ran into them out on my sabbatical. When I got back, when I came back with my wife and 2 kids, I talked to a dean of business at that point, because he handled the money. I had to talk him into buying that, and they cost like $600 or $700 at that time, and that was a lot of money at that time too. It was like twice as much, maybe more than that, for this little machine that had 4K of memory, 4,000 memory locations in it. And basically, in real simplified, every character, line of code you type in takes up approximately one of those memory spaces. So if you get into a long, involved program, you're really restricted to how much you can do and how many commands you can give it. So we would have problems with these new machines. We did buy one, and I realized I might have had a class of 10 or a dozen students, and there's one computer that they have to use during their lab time. And so they had to somehow take time. So we had open labs so they could actually sit down with it. And I think by the end of this first semester, I talked the business manager into buying a second one, just so if we had a problem with the first one, I could send it. I had no idea how to fix these things, and we had a lot of problems just because it was new. And we ended up, I don't know, we finally built it up where we have every semester, so we buy a couple more. So we had like 6, 7, 8 of them. And what happened when one would break down, I'd save the box that it came in when we bought it. When one broke down, I'd pack it in that box. I'd wrap it all up and have a truck come and take it to West Branch and to ship it out. And we had to ship them to California because that's where they were made. that's where they came from. And I got the first couple going through fine, and about, I don't know, third, fourth time, I put one in the box, wrapped it up, sent it, and it got to West Branch and came back. And said, this carton is oversized. And then I called him, I said, what do you mean oversized? This is the third time that carton's gone out. It worked good the first 2 times. And he said, well, this is the way we measure it. We measure the height, and then the distance around the middles. And the sum of those 2 have to fall in to whatever it is, 42 inches or something. What had happened over the life of that box, it had squished down and it got bigger around the middle. And so I finally explained that to these people. That's the reason it's not working. He said, I said, well, okay, send them in. And after that, I had no problem. They would just ship them through. They wouldn't kick them out, which was nice. But then after that, I don't know how soon it was, but I was surprised the dean of business actually said, Garlo, why don't you learn how to fix these? And because we were not only not having the equipment there to be used because it was in the mail, but anyway, so I found that there was a place that summer there was a seminar on fixing that pet computer, and I spent 6 weeks there, and I learned how to, and within a semester I could fix all of them. And as we moved along with that, because we ran that class for quite a while, it turned out to be a pretty good class for students that liked a little bit of math. They didn't have to have a lot of math, but we ran it as a math class. I think that's what it's called, wasn't it, Clay? Because Clay Horton, he was our instructor for a while, for quite a while.
Well, that's true, and a lot of schools would lump computer science in with mathematics
Yeah,
because
that's
they
where
weren't sure
it's-
what to do with it.
That's where it started.
And then
Yeah.
it became a separate
Yeah.
entity and branched out, and I've
Yeah.
actually spent more time in the art department showing them how to use computers than I did in
Uh-huh.
other areas
Yeah,
over time.
that's another thing on the,
We've talked quite a bit about the early days, and we've talked a little bit about technology. And then after the pets, IBM PCs became a part of what we did as far as technology. And they were called IBM PCs back then. And even to some degree, we purchased them directly from IBM. There was a time when we were going to purchase a big block of computers, and some salesmen said, we'll know they want them, so they shipped them here, and they ended up on the loading dock. And we had an edict come down from on high that said, do not touch or go near any of the stuff. It's all
that's
going
after
back.
my time.
It might have been after your time, but I think it was pretty close to your time because that was pretty early in the game.
Yeah.
But you learn how to fix computers, and then there was a whole cadre of people who became involved with computers. Let's talk about them. There's a guy named Tony Maddai. You remember Tony?
Yeah, he was the head tech, or head, he's the head computer man on campus when I was here.
He started out at Kirtland, and he studied a lot of networking with Kathy Marsh.
Yes, he did.
And he still does a lot of network administration to this day.
He is still here, isn't he?
He's still here. He's across the hallway if we want to go talk to him.
I talked to him. Recently, I've talked to him, shortly, because I knew he was still here. He's from Fairview or around there?
Lincoln.
Okay,
So
Little
he
farther.
lives in the farm country
yeah.
to the east of us just a little bit.
And he had a family, as I remember.
He has an extensive family,
Mhm.
and he's very family-centered. That's one of the things I really admire about him.
Good, yeah.
There's another guy who came on board shortly after him by the name of Matt Bierman,
Okay.
and he's done network administration. He took over as the head of the ITS department just this year.
Okay, good.
So we're there. But then there were some other people you worked with. Do you remember a man named Peter Howie?
Yes, I do, and I'm just trying to tell me about him.
Peter was kind of an artsy guy. He had an art background. He'd been to Grand Valley State. And Peter told us that in order to apply for the job as Kirtland's network administrator, he read a book on networking for dummies in the car while someone drove him up from Grand Valley to Roscommon. And of all the people who applied for that job, he was the one who seemed to be the least socially inhibited. Some of the folks who applied for that job were so socially
talk
crippled
with.
that they
Yeah.
couldn't even communicate with other normal people. But Peter could to some degree. The thing was that Peter had an IQ of about 160 or 170.
I
And
remember
he would get frustrated with people because they couldn't keep up with him. So
Yeah.
I would make it my business to try to think of what would I do, what would I say to entertain Peter. So there was a time when we were supposed to do a presentation in the student center. It was part of some sort of career day. And I told Peter I should take some time real quick here and make a sash out of blue network wire, and I'd be ready for the show. And he thought that was the funniest dumb thing he'd ever heard the whole time he was here.
Yeah.
Another time Peter complained because he couldn't buy a Burger King sandwich in Roscommon. So I live near Grayling, so one day I bought one, brought it out here, kept it in an extra bag to keep it warm. I walked down the hall, not the hallway, but the walkway. I reached out to him and handed him his bag of Burger King and said, Peter, here you go, Swappers for you.
What do you have to say about that?
You're a strange man. Which is okay, because that's high praise coming from Peter.
Yeah.
He moved on to become an arts administrator for a gallery in southeast Michigan.
Yeah,
So-
he appeared to be very sharp. We were in the same meeting once a month with Peter and Mike Wall.
Mike Wall was the dean of technology at that time,
Okay,
and he's still strongly involved with the school. He's on the Kirtland Foundation along with his sister.
yeah,
I should get him to come in here and,
Yep,
and
he's
tell
got
his
a lot.
story, because he's around, he's available.
yep.
and
He's
he
an
knows a lot of
interesting man to
stories.
talk with. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, he is.
We also had a guy named Detmar Finke.
Oh, he did.
I'm going to have you tell us a little bit about Detmar.
When Detmar came on campus, he's a friend of Richard's, a very good, but I don't think was a friend of Richard before he got here, but he and Richard Silverman were very close over the years. And when he came in, we were looking for an English instructor, and we were looking for someone with a master. And so he interviewed for the job, and they hired him with the idea that he was going to get his master's. And he taught the first semester, as I recall. Well, in the first year or semester, he went in and wanted his salary changed from bachelor's to master's, because he said he had the equivalent of it. His story is that where he went to school in California or someplace, that you go, once you get your bachelor's, you can study right straight through without receiving a master's and go and just receive the doctorate degree. And to my understanding, that's what he was working on, but he dropped that. He never got a PhD. But the story is, it was like one class away or something, or one paper away, and he decided he was one going to do it. Well, he was trying to force the board into raising his pay. And in some ways of thinking about it, he did have the equivalence of the master's. He just didn't have the paper, because he had gone past the master's, but
Right.
never received the degree itself for it. See.
He had the 34 hours of beyond baccalaureate credit.
Yep, and he had more than that. He had 60, but they didn't accept that as master's, and that was his gripe. And he took him to court with it. They finally fired him.
That was the first time he worked here.
That was the first time, yeah. So that's that part of it. Now, as far as where do you want me to go from there? The second time?
The second time, he no longer was practicing English. He had changed his emphasis
Into
to technology
in computer
and to
science.
spamming us with so much email
Yeah.
that people learned how to filter.
But the reason, see, the board never hired him back. Richard hired him back with the idea, because I asked Richard about that, and he said, well, he's not teaching any credit-related courses. He was just teaching non-credit courses. And he was on campus, and I think that was the case, because he had a lot of those little courses he was teaching.
He taught a lot of things for community education before I became involved with it.
Okay.
And then when he left the field from that, then they contacted me, and I ended up teaching a lot of those little courses
Yep,
too, along
sure.
with the other credit courses
Yep.
I was responsible for. But Detmar had the idea that he should bring every piece of information that he ever ran across and forward it to everyone else without actually reading it or digesting it. And if he'd come up with, a digest, we probably would have been okay with it. But when you have 30 or 40 emails in your box and it's brand new, so you're not really used to the idea that you're going to have 30 or 40 emails that you don't really have to
That
attend
must
to
have
that
been after
closely.
my time, too. I don't remember seeing.
You were still kind of around, but
Yeah.
you at that point you may have
I
just said,
probably
well, this
just,
is all good.
I was probably just deleting them as they came in.
That's pretty much what a lot of people were doing. He finally figured out that a lot of people in technology had figured out how to filter his email and did so frequently,
Yeah.
almost all the time.
Yeah. Now, Carol Finca, she retired, hadn't she? As a
No,
head-
Carol Finca is still
Still here?
teaching
Oh, I thought-
composition.
Okay, I thought
And,
she's plenty old enough. Isn't
Well,
she?
we're all plenty old enough,
Yeah,
but
but I mean, she's got 30 years in it, isn't she? Or no.
probably pretty close. It's a
Okay.
matter of whether you like doing it for some people,
And I imagine she does.
she
if
does like doing it. So,
she's
and
interested. with it.
Fred Jacobazzi's even older than her, and he has that number of years, or pretty close to it,
Mhm.
and he's still happy doing it.
Now,
Helen Shearer is in her 80s,
Is Fred
and she's
teaching for us,
Fred Jacobazzi still teaches for us.
and also in Traverse City? Or
He
is
lives in Traverse City, but he teaches for Kirtland at our various locations. John Thompson is still here.
Yeah, I know John.
he-
When I was here, he'd go home weekend. He lived here around here. I think he had one of the housing units on campus. This is Fred,
Sure.
and he would go home for a long weekend or something. I thought.
Well,
So he's doing about the same thing yet? Well, I thought maybe he's doing mostly online courses or something that will allow him
his
to be in
career
Traverse.
has been interesting. He did a lot of teaching. He did a lot of technical writing instruction. He became involved with technology. He was one of our first webmasters for a number of years. That was part of his
He's a
contribution to
sharp
the
man.
school.
Yeah.
And he does teach a lot of online courses. We have a lot of online courses in general at this point.
Yeah.
And but on the other hand, everywhere there's a kind of a dip in college enrollment. Central Michigan just announced this week that they were going to start laying people off after this semester. They're not sure exactly who's going to go, and a lot of their positions that had become vacant were left vacant because they anticipated the problem.
Is this because of online courses?
Well, not so much because of online courses, but more along the lines of when Y2K first came around, it really did a big hit on the economy. And the people who would have been born in 2000 would be college age now, but parents couldn't afford to have them. So there's a dearth of college age students in the pipeline.
Mm-hmm.
On the other end of it, a lot of the things that we used to fill our classes, like retraining, have become not college credit opportunities anymore. A lot of that stuff has migrated to a new division that deals with micro-badging and smaller courses, more direct-to-work type of environments, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But it does take a hit on society in general and the number of people who have the breadth and depth of knowledge that you would have from a college or a university education. If all you did was a few weeks in some sort of technology type of environment, it makes it hard to work through that. So that's one of the challenges that we face now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
To wrap this up, when you think about your career, you started out in the public schools, you found a brochure on the table that said, come to Kirtland, we need people. You hit the ground and you're ready to run, but you have to wait for a few months in order to get everything going. You go through the evolution of the students from just out of Vietnam, or people who have been married for a few years and their relationships dissolved and now they have to juggle children, work, and school, to where you work through, because you've been retired for a few years now.
Mm-hmm.
What kinds of things do you remember? What were some of the high points of what you did when you were working?
Oh, I don't know. I was the chairman of the math department for the last, I'd be 15 years of that. And I enjoyed working with students. I enjoyed working with the instructors and setting up courses. I just felt I could walk out of the classroom and drive home at night and feel I accomplished something. You know, not every day, but something I felt good about.
One of the things I notice about it is that you may not see it immediately, but if you give yourself a little bit of time, you can see how people grow and change when they're working with you. And they may not be aware of it at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
but I would see that someone had come in and their skills weren't what they needed to be to have an employer be interested in them. But by the time they finished, they were ready.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, that has value.
Yep.
It's not just a matter of how much stuff you sold in a quarter or how much profit you squeezed out of a particular niche market or what have you,
Yep.
but making the society grow.
And I think our students on the whole were interested in being here. There's always a few that shouldn't be here, but the majority of them are here for a reason, and they study, they do their homework, they're inquisitive, and I think I just feel that I feel good for them.
Thanks so much for coming out, Jim. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.